On the last episode of the Keepsake box, I saw Ron's anger starting to build, and I was powerless to stop it. "There's nothing I can do to him, at least not for a few months," said Ron. He told me that somebody had to pay, and he decided that he would punish both me and Ken. Before I could react, Ron stood and slapped me in the face. "If he thought he was mad before, he's really going to have a reason now," said Ron. He pushed me back onto the bed and attempted to pull my sweatpants off. I tried to fight him, but he was much stronger than I was. Ron seemed to enjoy the fight. He had the strangest expression on his face, almost like a smirk, but that quickly changed when I scratched his face in an attempt to get him off of me. Ron became extremely irate. Before I could think, he punched me in the mouth. The taste of warm blood filled my mouth, so much so that I started to choke on it. That was the first time that Ron had struck me in the face with a closed fist. I instinctively grabbed my mouth, freeing my hands from my sweatpants. Ron pounced on the opportunity and wrestled my pants off. That was what I considered to be at the time the first time that I was raped. It was violent. I've tried to push that event out of my mind since it happened, but I've relived it in instances where I've had no valid reason to do so. If not for the need to tell this story, I would not have ever spoken of it again. When Ron was finished, he pulled his pants up and smiled. After a few minutes of watching me cry, Ron spat in my face. "Actions have consequences," he said, and with that, he left my bedroom. I was not only physically hurt, but I was humiliated. I locked my bedroom door and went into my bathroom. I certainly looked like what I had been through. My lip was bloody and swollen, and I was visibly disheveled. I sat on the toilet. A trail of blood followed me, making me aware that I was severely damaged down below. I showered and got into bed. I didn't want to be anywhere in Ron's line of sight. I hated myself for the times that I wanted his attention. That was one of the lowest points in my life. Chapter 21, She Knew. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Ron began to rape me on a daily basis. It was no longer enough to just lock my bedroom door at night. Sometimes he would pounce on me the second I walked in from school. I stopped fighting him. I learned that if I just let it happen, it usually ended a little more quickly. Also, it was apparent that Ron received some sort of sick pleasure from the fight. I refused to make the experience more enjoyable for him. I let him have his way with me. That became our normal routine. I hated it, and I hated my life. The only thing that kept me sane was counting down the time until Ken's return and imagining how things could be for us. Ron became extremely cruel in instances where there was no necessity. Not that cruelty was ever necessary. I was responsible for doing the laundry. We had a washer and dryer, and it was generally acceptable for me to use them. But after Ken's court date, Ron insisted that I hang his clothes outside on the clothesline. It was bitterly cold. The temperatures were frigid, some days in the single digits. Standing in the extreme cold, hanging Ron's clothes on the line, reminded me of how much control he had over my life. My comfort, or lack thereof, was squarely in Ron's hands, and he loved that. I always tried to look unaffected, even when my fingers were so numb that they hurt. I didn't want to give Ron the pleasure of seeing me broken, but no one's that strong, especially not a 16-year-old. On the rare occasions when I broke, Ron would smile and tell me to blame my boyfriend. He never let me forget why I was being punished. But that was just an excuse. Truth be told, he enjoyed it. If not for the situation with Ken, Ron would have found a different reason to be cruel. That's who he was. So I played the game and did what I needed to do to make it through those days. Life shouldn't have been that hard, but it was about to get harder. March rolled around and Ken was halfway through his sentence. I got home from school and busied myself with the multitudes of miscellaneous tasks that Ron had prepared for me. I heard the phone ringing. I wasn't in the habit of answering the phone, as the calls weren't ever for me. Suddenly, Ron came running into the kitchen. He told me that Mom was in the hospital and we needed to leave quickly. I saw the panic in Ron's face, which informed me that I should panic as well. We jumped into Ron's truck and sped down the roadway. "What happened?" I asked. He never answered, but I knew it was bad. Ron was crying and he kept hitting the steering wheel. The ride, which actually only took about 20 minutes, seemed to take hours. I had my issues with Mom, but I certainly didn't want anything to happen to her. I had an awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I knew that whatever was going on would change things forever. We finally reached our destination. Ron ran towards the hospital entrance and I followed suit. We took an elevator to the 3rd floor where a doctor met us in the hallway. He informed us that Mom was heavily sedated and not able to communicate. I entered the hospital room. My eyes immediately searched for Mom, and I was shocked by what I saw. She was swollen and bloated, and there were tubes running in all directions. It was extremely hard to take in. Making matters worse, I still had no idea what had happened to her. Ron broke the silence and simultaneously opened the largest can of worms imaginable. "Is the baby okay?" The doctor and nurse looked at each other. "Mr. Davis, your wife isn't pregnant." Ron and I both stared at each other. For the first time in a very long time, he and I were on the same page. "That's impossible," said Ron, and I shared his sentiments. According to Mom, she was nearly 4 months pregnant. She looked and acted just like she did when she was pregnant with Cassidy. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. And that thought reminded me that Cassidy was still at daycare. "Oh my goodness," I said. "Who's going to get Cassidy?" Ron mumbled that he couldn't believe that he had forgotten her and told me to stay there in case Mom woke up. Ron left the hospital to retrieve Cassidy from daycare. I stared at Mom while she was in her medically induced slumber. I quietly prayed that she would wake up, and it reminded me that I hadn't prayed in a while. Ron would be gone for at least an hour, and being alone with Mom provided me with a brief moment of comfort. Mom and I hadn't experienced that level of closeness in a long time. I realized how much I missed her and the relationship that we used to share. We were almost strangers in that house. I yearned for the feelings of time past, but the events that followed would make it impossible for us to ever share that relationship again. A few minutes into my visit, the nurse came in and asked if I had a moment to talk. I followed her into a break room that was reserved for hospital staff. There was something in her demeanor that immediately concerned me. She was very direct with me. There's no easy way to ask this, so I'm just going to come out with it. "Is your stepfather abusing you?" I was shocked. "Why would you ask me that?" I exclaimed. She told me that she could protect me if I told her the truth. I stood quietly as she continued to talk. "Do you know what happened to your mom?" she asked. I shook my head to indicate that I did not know the circumstances surrounding Mom's impromptu visit to the hospital. The nurse told me that Mom had tried to commit suicide. Again, I was shocked. "Why would she do that?" I asked. The nurse continued, and her words cut me like a knife. "Your mom was babbling incoherently when she arrived. She said some things that concerned me. She said that she wanted to die because her husband was having an affair with her daughter and he no longer wanted her. She said that she had faked a pregnancy to get his attention, but that it only made the situation worse. Your mom took a lot of pills, but there's evidence that she had been struggling with drug abuse for a while. She told me that she had started doing drugs with her husband, but once he stopped using, he started threatening to use her drug habit against her to gain custody of you and your sister. So I'll ask you again, is your stepfather abusing you?" I had been provided with a lot of information, and I had to take everything into consideration. The average person would have used that moment as their out. Telling the truth would certainly have gotten me out of Ron's grasp. But there were other factors in play. Where would I go? Back to Grandma's with her strict rules and judgmental church? Into the system? Where would Cassidy go? What if I got sent away and Cassidy was left with Mom and Ron? What if Ron started touching Cassidy in my absence? The thought of that made me sick, and I started to vomit into the trash can. I apologized to the nurse and told her that I must have gotten a bug that was going around. She looked me squarely in the eyes. "Are you pregnant?" she asked. "Of course not," I exclaimed. She stood there, studying me. "Would you like to take a test?" she asked. I nodded my head to indicate that I did indeed want to take it. I knew I needed to take the test, and in my heart, I knew it would be positive. The test confirmed my worst nightmare. It was positive. I told the nurse that I was pregnant by my boyfriend and that Ron hadn't ever touched me. I was able to convince her that all was well and that she had witnessed the wild ramblings of a deranged drug addict. She gave me some literature about teen pregnancy, and I went back to Mom's room. All of the emotions that I tried to suppress came rushing to the surface. I just started crying, and I was unable to stop. I cried because Mom had tried to commit suicide. I cried because I was convinced that Mom's drug use had resulted in Cassidy being developmentally delayed. I cried because I was pregnant by Ron. I cried because Mom had known what Ron was doing all along. She did nothing to protect me. She knew. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.